have a very special lady that follows me on my YouTube channel, and she's always asking me to please read another chapter of The Dollmaker by Harriet Arno. She just loves the story. And so for Mother's Day for her, here comes chapter 13. And if you remember, at this point in the book, Gertie and the children had moved into their apartment there in Detroit. And they were meeting all kinds of people from different parts of the world, different parts of the United States, different ethnicities, different lifestyles. But you could tell that all of these people were willing to help each other. And that was really interesting to Gertie and the children. It was fascinating. So let's get to it and start on chapter 13. Eat your oats, Cassie. You'll get mighty hungry in school. But Cassie only gagged and stared at Gertie with frightened, beseeching eyes. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to kindergarten, Clyde put in briskly. And Pop said you had to go. All the other young'uns goes and you'll like it, Cassie. And later Gertie repeated, you'll like it, Cassie. As she got the child along with the others into what seemed like numerous pieces of clothing Clovis had bought for them all, when after some cross-questioning, he learned Gertie still had money left over from Henley and what she had got from the sale of her stock and little store of molasses, corn, and potatoes, better than $200. Struggling now with the heavy woolen pants of Cassie's new snowsuit, she thought again of the money. She didn't begrudge the children clothes, boots, scarves, more underclothing, snowsuits for everybody but Reuben, boots for herself, and a woolen head rag. But most of the money she had meant to keep for getting a start of livestock when they went back home. Only the money for the land was left, the secret money gathered through the years. She had told Clovis of Henley's gift, knowing he would learn of it from the children, who had learned from her mother. But the new coat carried the secret of her savings as well as the old. She roused to call to Enoch, who, all eagerness to see a fine new school, was dashing outside. It was only a few minutes past 8, and Sophrony had told them that school children were supposed to leave home between 8:20 and 8:30, not a minute sooner or a minute later, else the safety patrol boys would be gone. But now, just as she started to open the door to remind Enoch of the time, he turned and screamed, Mom! Mom, we'll be late! Maggie's brothers and a lot more youngsters is already a-going. And without waiting for an answer, he ran to the little crowd of children hurrying down the alley. Enoch paid her no mind but walked on, following a few steps behind the children. Though not one of them turned to speak to him, some whispering, giggling talk went between them, and a little girl with long black curls turned and walked backwards to get a better see at him, giggling all the while. Suddenly, as if by signal, they all stopped and turned and looked at him. Gertie saw, even in the smoky early morning light, the red flush rise on Enoch's cheeks. He hesitated an instant, and then he came on, but more slowly now, watching the children. She watched Maggie's red-headed brother, the biggest one, bigger by far than Enoch, step out from the others. Then, so quick that she hardly saw it, was the fist swung hard on Enoch's shoulder, and the expertly tripping foot that sent him sprawling on the alley ice. The smaller one, the boy who had thrown the Coca-Cola bottle, grabbed Enoch's fallen-off cap, new, with earmuffs, and flung it into a trash can, crying over his shoulder as he ran after the others, You go to your public school, you hillbilly heathen yous! We don't have to go to school with you G's and hillbillies. She started down the steps, but hid again behind the storm door when Enoch got slowly to his feet. She watched him brush the black snow from his clothing, take his cap from the trash can, and then with a smear of dirt on his cheek and limping a little, come back to his own walk where he stopped and gave a quick, suspicious glance all around as to make sure that none had seen his humiliation. She wanted to ask if they had hurt him much, but did not. Enoch would rather have her believe that he could take care of himself than to have her sympathy. Clyde called to remind her that it was 15 minutes past 8. She gave Enoch one last pitying glance and hurried back to the job of getting the younger ones into the strange, seeming outdoor clothing, sending each child, as soon as it was booted, buckled, and zipped, outside to wait with Enoch. Then there was nothing to do but the things she had dreaded since coming, and dreaded still more after watching Enoch in the alley. Put on her own outdoor clothing. Take the birth certificates and the shot papers from the county health department, as Sophrony had told her to do, and go to the strange school with the children. She pulled on the great knee-high boots Clovis had bought for her, but stood an instant longer in the kitchen. The Josiah basket under the table, because there seemed no room anyplace else for it, caught her eye. She picked it up, dropped the papers into it, and as she went out, the familiar feel of the basket dangling from her arm was a comforting thing. Marshall has decided to come into the she shed and listen to the story. The children stood waiting in a silent little huddle against the coal house, which gave some shelter from the keen-fingered north wind. Clyde frowned on the basket, whispering, "Mom, I don't think people up here carries baskets." But Gertie only pressed the basket against her as she stood by the telephone pole and looked about her. The sky, unlike the skies back home, told her nothing. Was it the even gray of the clouds, of smoke, a cloudy dawn, or a cloudy sunset? It seemed early, very early, more like milking time than school time. She heard a train, the clank and hissing roar of the steel mill, and sounds of traffic on the through street, one row of houses away, but there was no sight nor sound of people. She had a sudden distrust of the clock. Maybe it was night still. She looked at the shivering, frightened children. Even Enoch was afraid, his cap twisting in his hand, an old man look on him as he stared straight ahead. Then he and the others looked up eagerly as a half-starved sheep, when the meanwhile door next to their own was flung open, and Sophrony's Claude Jean and Gilbert ran down the steps. Enoch looked toward them but did not move. Claude Jean, the smaller, a pale-eyed, white-headed boy of about his size, ran a little distance down the alley and stopped suddenly and called back, "Well, come on, you kids, ain't you going to school?" Enoch's smile was a warming thing to see. He ran after them at once, followed a moment later by Clyde, with Reuben going last and more slowly. Gertie was leading Cassie and Amos into the slippery alley when the meanwhile door was flung open again, and Sophrony, shrouded in clouds of steam, came onto the stoop with a freshly washed sheet in her hands, a cigarette in one corner of her mouth, a clothespin bag over her arm, and calling, "Hey, you!" The golden peacocks fluttered around her feet as, with one eye squinted against the cigarette smoke, she began to hang the sheet on the clothesline, pushing down pins with sharp, swift jabs, fighting to get the sheet hung before it froze. "You leave the little young'uns with me," she said, when one hand was free and she could take the cigarette from her mouth. "No need of dragging them all that way through this cold." Her still blue eyes went to Amos and smiled. "Don't you want to play with little Wheat-Eye? You uns can have the best time." The last pin in, she turned, pulled open her door, and gave Amos a little push as she called, "Wheat-Eye, there's a little boy come to see you." Gertie had a glimpse of check linoleum, flowery curtains in the kitchen so crammed with a washing machine and other furniture that there seemed no room for a woman of even Sophrony's size. She was considering trying to explain that Amos might cry with a stranger when the closing storm door for an instant framed Sophrony's face, blowing smoke and whispering, "He'll be all right." Gertie tried to find Amos through the steam-blanketed glass and, failing, turned to the puzzled Cassie. "It don't seem right leaving your little brother this away with a stranger woman, but we ain't got time to argue." Cassie only shivered and said nothing as Gertie hurried away, realizing the others were out of sight and that with no one to show her, she had not the least notion of how to find the school. However, when she and Cassie had turned into the big alley by the railroad fence, they found themselves at once in a swarm of children, all headed through the street. They walked on what Gertie thought must be a cement sidewalk under the layers of snow tramped into ice. The through street by which they walked was clean of snow, though great banks of dirty ice and snow from the snowplows overflowed onto the sidewalk. Broad as the street was, it was crowded with cars and trucks and buses, with many flashing by so close the children were splattered from the pile-up and slush. She was hurrying along, trying to avoid the splatterings, and worried over Cassie, who walked with less and less enthusiasm, when a boy in a white belt stepped in front of her with his arms outspread. "Watch out, lady!" She stepped back, seeing for the first time railroad tracks running right across the street, and then saw not 20 feet away a train grinding towards her. The truck and the cars had been making so much noise she hadn't even heard the signal bells on the train. The cars, loaded mostly with rusty scrap iron, moved ever more slowly past. Cassie began to whimper and shiver with the cold. Gertie's nose and cheeks began to sting, and in spite of the boots, her feet were cold. It came to her that instead of stomping around in angry silence last Saturday when Clovis came home with her money spent and the car half full of new clothing, she ought to have thanked him. The children had to have the strange heavy clothes if on their way to school they had to stand still like this in what seemed like below zero cold. The train stopped, and Gertie wished the thing were human and she could hit it. The children were piling up like leaves against a cedar tree, and the cars and trucks were stretching out as far as a body could see. But the train stood there puffing like some great iron beast with no skin to hurt in the cold. The children stood without complaining, accepting the train and the cold and the smoke and the smell of the cars as if they were a natural part of God's world. All but Cassie, who stood with trembling chin and brimming eyes. Gertie realized there was something the child wanted to say, and she bent her head to hear the tremulous whisper, "Please, Mom, let's get home out of all this racket. I can't learn to read nohow, and I'm a frozen cold." Gertie turned her away from the train. "Listen, honey, we'll get going again pretty soon, and then you'll see this big, fine school. Law, it's the prettiest, finest place. There'll be a gymnasium where you can all learn to do tricks, and Reuben can show them how good he can play basketball, and a big, fine lunchroom, and a room with nothing but books, pretty books like you ain't never seen, and a place for Clyde to learn cooking and sewing." She realized that both the train and the traffic were still, and that around her the children, too, were still and listening. She pressed Cassie's face close against her coat and laid her hands on her scarf-wrapped ears, all the while conscious of the watching, listening children. Her glance happened on a boy bigger than Enoch, maybe as old as Reuben, and not one of her own kind of people. There was a strange, dark look about him, something sullen and mean in his face, she thought. He would in any minute now call her a hillbilly. The others would laugh as they had laughed in the alley. She stood bent protectively over the face-hidden Cassie, her glance more beseeching and then commanding as it went round the half-circle of silent watching children. She looked longest at the boy, begging him for his silence, but his black eyes stared back into her gray ones, his eyes accusing, condemning, she thought, as if she had committed the unpardonable sin. He continued to stare at her, condemn her, all the while he was taking off one of his ripped leather gloves and then searching through his jacket pockets. He found at last what he hunted, and only now taking his glance from Gertie, he stepped up to Cassie and tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, little girl, here's something nice." And he pushed 2 tiny paper-wrapped squares into the hand that clutched Gertie's coat. He bent and put his face close to Cassie's pressed down one, and he said, "It's gum, little girl. My mama give it. Bubble gum. Chew it and don't be afraid, little girl. Kindergarten is nice." And behind the boy and all around him were little calls like twittering of birds. "Don't be scared, little girl. Mrs. Vanishki, she's real nice. Yous don't do nothing in there but play all the time. We sing lots of songs." and somewhere a voice unknown but familiar said, "Don't be afeard, honey. Good little young'uns don't ever get no spankings in kindergarten." Cassie did not lift her face, but one hand let go its grip on Gertie to close over the red-wrapped chunky squares and disappear between Cassie and her mother's coat. The boy smiled at Gertie, a triumphant smile that washed all the sullenness away, and now he looked like a tired and sleepy child, maybe no more than 9 years old. And in a moment he did lift his arms and yawn with a long stretching, but his face was accusing again when he said in a careful whisper, "Bet you ought not to tell her such big lies, lady. 'S no way to start 'em out. I had the time through Xavier on all the account I lied to him." Gertie, in spite of her shivers, smiled. "You took him to kindergarten, I bet, for your mama." "Nah, nursery school. Pop's a waist gunner in the Pacific. Mom works do 7 to 3 shift way over at Griggs number 10. His eyes grew bright with pride. "Her runs one of them big presses good as a man. Her got him 14 hours overtime last week." The train was moving again, and he took Cassie's hand. "Reader, her goes to school 1st grade, morning shift, but Xavier and Mary I got to take to nursery school on account of Mom. Her leaves too early. Xavier, he started crying the first thing in the morning I took him. Mom, she'll hurry to be back and get you right away, I tells the kid. Mom had to work overtime. I had to go to the store after school. I never got the kids till 5 o'clock. Next morning when I tried to leave, Xavier, he'd grab my leg, wrap his arms around it, and wouldn't let go. Nothing, shut up his screaming, gum, sour balls, nothing." "Ain't it awful cold for a little young'un so early in the morning?" Gertie asked. "Here the stars will be up still bright at midnight." "Stars," the boy said. "I put plenty of clothes on him." The train broke apart at last, and the little boy in the white belt waved them forward. Gertie went on, the wide bottom split basket riding above the bobbing heads of the children, who flooded out across the tracks and overflowed the walk, with many wading knee-deep in the slush by the road. She searched anxiously over their heads, hunting out her own, but could find no one of the three, and wanted to go faster, but could not for the press of the children. She wanted to ask the boy what was the lie she had told, but the hurrying, crowding children gave her little chance to talk, not even where they were stopped again by more boys in white belts, stationed where they were to cross the wide through street. She began shivering again. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was fear. Crossing the tracks had been easy, but here it looked as if they could never cross. Cars, trucks, gasoline tank trailers, many-wheeled, diesel-powered steel carriers, buses, all had piled up waiting on the other side of the railroad crossing, and were now going again, speeding to make up for the lost time, a roaring, belching, smoking, steaming river on wheels. She looked hopefully about for a signal light or a policeman on the corner, like in the storybooks, but there was neither. At last, the train traffic thinned. The little boys crept further and further into the street, and soon the children surged across. They hurried between a mighty truck with wheels higher than their heads, pulling 2 red tank trailers with the word danger on their sides, and a stubby-nosed 32-wheeled steel carrier loaded with one great round of steel lashed down with ropes big as Gertie's wrist. The boy still kept his grip on Cassie's, and as they crossed the street and went through the deep slush at the curbs, Gertie realized that he didn't have high rubber boots like her own and most of the other children. His leather ones were old and cracked, and plainly they would not hold out water, and the laces were not stout rawhide but broken strings. Still, he had money for gum. Shoestrings didn't cost any more than a package of gum. Maybe there wasn't money for both. She glanced at Cassie, clutching the gum as if it had been the little hickory doll. It was, of course, better to spend money for shoestrings than for gum, but the butt still troubled her when, after walking for what seemed like a long while by traffic-crowded streets, they stopped again for another crossing, and she looked about her at the children. She saw here and there a child shivering in an old coat or ragged overalls. There were red, mittenless hands and unbooted feet in low shoes that were not new. She gave a slow head shake of wonderment. There couldn't be any more poor people, not really poor in Detroit, when they were making men come out of the back hills to work in Detroit's factories. This boy now, there ought to be lots of money in his house. Money from the army and the factory job, too. Maybe it was like she'd heard her mother say when somebody pitied Meg. Factory workers, coal miners, and such were shiftless, spendthrift tribe. So Gertie's thinking, okay, these guys are, she didn't know any better. These people are coming to Detroit and working in these factories, and they're making lots of money. This child told her that his mom worked 14 hours overtime the week before. So how come they don't have gloves and nice shoes and nice coats? And in Gertie's mind, it's because they're all, shifty, no good. But some of them have already proved her wrong, haven't they? Especially this little boy who she thought was going to call her a hillbilly and be mean to Cassie. He's done nothing but try to help. An old man with a bad limp helped the boys stop the traffic here, for with no bumpy railroad tracks to slow them down, the wheeled things flew even faster. Gertie went down a narrow side street bordered by low factory buildings on one side, and on the other by a row of little ramshackle paint-peeling houses crowded close together, but with the look of homes. She turned another corner, and all unconscious of the children pressing around her, the boy pulling on Cassie's hand, Gertie stopped in the snow and stared. High above the river of bobbling heads, she saw a flag, clean with a golden tassel, flying straight out of the northern wind like a flag painted on a tin. Below the flag, she saw a black roof streaked with snow, and under the roof, 2 rows of empty windows set in the dark soot-stained walls of a 2-story brick building that rose high and straight out of the dirty, trampled, paper-littered snow. The bit of yard was separated from the street by a high iron fence, like the fences she had heard about that were penitentiaries. Well, that's the truth, isn't it? Sometimes school's like prison. Getting closer, she saw that the big building, so low she had not at first noticed, there were 2 little flimsy-looking houses built of gray painted wood. They made her think of the makeshift railroad workers' houses she had seen in the valley. As she walked past them to the main building, she saw a window broken and mended with a board. Walls spattered with mud and dirty snow, and under the eaves of one not much higher than her head, a piece of gutter pipe loose and creaking in the wind. "Dem's a portables. The kids in shifts go to 'em," the boy explained and pulled Cassie onward. Gertie's eyes jumped back and forth across the strip of trampled snow that made the schoolyard. There must be a tree. One tree for the children to see come spring. Some flowering bushes like the mock orange they'd set by Deer Lick School when she was a girl. Some flowers, something. They went up steps and filled the children with the smell of coal smoke. In front of her were steps going up and steps going down, and she hesitated. Somewhere a bell changed that made her think of the railroad signal bells, and the boy said, "We're almost a tardy accounted to train." He pulled his hand from Cassie's and looked back at Gertie before plunging into the stream of children. "You can't go no place till all the kids in their home rooms. One of them girls," and he pointed to a tall girl with a band on her arm, "can show you where he's a kindergarten." This reminds me of our little town here, built a new school for the little ones. I think it's kindergarten and 1st grade. And Mr. Re-Ritten and I went driving around it to check it out. And instead of being brick buildings like they used to be, like our little town used to have a brick building with a big bell in it, anymore they're making them out of like siding and tin roofs, and they're not going to last. But anyway, we also noticed there was not a playground we went all the way around the school. There was no playground, no trees. So I asked one of my granddaughters who had gone to that school if there was a playground. And she said that in between two walls of the building, there was a little play area where they could play. But I'm like Gertie, it's like you couldn't see the sky, you couldn't see the big oak trees, you can't see the flowers and bushes. It's just not the same. The sea swallowed him, and as Gertie stood pressed against the wall, a growing uneasiness laid hold of her. Maybe the others had got lost on their way, but that, she told herself, could have happened no more than if they had been logs coming down a swift, smooth river. She was glad the gloves she wore. Cassie, clinging to her still, couldn't feel the clamminess of her hands as she thought of Enoch in the alley and the word hillbilly in the railroad station. If she could go for them all, but especially for Cassie, someone touched her arm, and she saw it was the tall girl to whom the boy had pointed, and she was smiling and friendly like. "Are you and Mrs. Neville's that wants to enter a kid in kindergarten?" Gertie nodded, and when the stream of children had thinned somewhat, she followed the girl across the hall into a large room where she saw many little chairs and tables, a fireplace, and a piano. But mostly she saw the children, all kinds, all colors, and all shapes. Seemed like they were moving, little young'uns from this place and that place, like the White Lily voting precinct back home. Slowly, with the little girl making a path for her and Cassie clinging to her hand, Gertie made her way through the children. She was at last stopped completely by the great swarm, about 2 women by the desk, and she stood throwing quick, searching glances at the women. One, dressed in dark blue, was small and old with gray hair. She had a nice smile and looked to be a good woman. It was hard to say about the other. Her hair was curled and her face was painted. And worse, she wore long earrings that Gertie saw when she got closer that were shaped into little birds with blue jewel-like eyes swinging from a vine. The birds were swinging as the woman bent her head above a little boy, and Gertie realized the little boy and not the teacher was the center of attention, for all the children around looked at him. The painted teacher was bent above him saying, "We're so happy to have you with us, Garcia. Garcia, is that right?" But the little dark-haired, dark-eyed, small little boy, dressed all in clean new clothes, neither smiled nor answered. He only studied the swinging silver birds with the bright bird-like eyes, and the faded teacher watching smiled, a kind of sighing smile. "I think we better try to get him into a special school. He doesn't understand a word." But the other, younger, shook her head with the birds that flew past her cheeks. "His family would never send him. A neighbor brought him. His mother works the day shift. He understands. I know he understands a little." She turned towards Gertie when the tall girl said, calling across the heads of children, Miss Van Nishke, this is Miss Neville's." The tall girl went away, and the older woman went to the other side of the room, gathering children on the way, so that the group thinned enough for Gertie to reach the desk. She swallowed, gripping Cassie's hand, and in a moment she too would have to leave. The painted lips smiled at her briefly. The silver birds jangled as the yellow curls bent above Cassie. "How nice to have a great big girl like you." Cassie was silent, and her glance leaping from high-piled yellow curls to silver birds to red fingernails. Mrs. Wyszynski saw the gum twisting in her mittened fingers. "And when you first come, we let you chew your gum. Wouldn't you like to unwrap it?" Cassie loosened her grip on Gertie and took the gum in both hands. "If you take off your mittens, you can do it better," Miss Wyszynski said. Cassie was lifting the gum to Gertie for holding while she took off her mittens when there came a soft, hesitant, half questioning, half pleading, "Shickle?" Miss Wyszynski turned quickly. The other woman, in the midst of a lip-fingering shh, 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 heard what seemed Gertie 1,000 children's voices, for she too turned quickly, smiling and nodding. When Miss Wyszynski said, pleased as if she had found a wad of gold, Garcia has spoken. Garcia, on hearing his name, looked up, but his eyes came back to the gum. He made Gertie think of a diddle, run with the mother hen all summer, knowing only her call, stopping for the first time to study an apron folded up with corn, and consider making it last the first step to come alone for the corn. Oh, why don't you give him a piece, Cassie, Gertie asked, handing back the gum into the now bare hands. Cassie hesitated and then unwrapped the gum with her awkward fingers that had never before unwrapped gum. She gave her sudden quick smile and handed one piece to Garcia, while a dozen or so children who had unburdened themselves of the other teachers drifted back to make a watching circle. Thank you for the gum, Cassie, Miss Wyszynski said. There came a little chorus of children's voices, well-behaved voices, as if they were doing what they thought they should do. Thank you for the gum, Cassie. Though in and out through the chorus were cries and comments. Can he bubble it? Mom, he bring me a whole package from a shop. And one, a little girl with what Gertie thought must have a permanent wave, and what she knew was a dirty rayon dress with no petticoat underneath it, seized Miss Wyszynski's hands. Your fingernail polish, it's like what Mom's got. And another, jealous, cried, my mother's got the same kind of permanent. A blue-eyed little boy with almost no front teeth tweaked at her smock, begging, Miss Wyszynski, please, will you wear the yellow boy dress? I am your away-from-home mother, children, Miss Wyszynski said. Now please go back to your seats. Mrs. White is waiting. And as one hand began a gentle, determined pushing of a T-shirt-clad shoulder, the other picked up a pink card. The quick eyes, calculating, Gertie thought, not matching the red lips or the yellow curls, flicked over Garcia chewing his gum with an expert rolling motion, now devoid of sound, and then Cassie chewing experimentally, slowly, as if constantly reminding her tongue not to swallow. The child's shoulder moved away from the hand. The hand went into the big pocket of the bright smock and came out with a fountain pen. The eyes flipped Gertie while the head flipped toward Cassie. Name? Gertie hesitated. Kiza Marie, but generally we call her Cassie. She don't give much promise of living up to her namesake. Namesake? Yes, you know, the other Kezia was among the fairest in the land. Oh, Miss Wyszynski hurried down the list of questions while Gertie put on her desk Kathy's birth certificate and the little papers showing that she had her shots from county health. Oh, good, Miss Wyszynski said. It's nice you had your doctor do all that. Now, Cassie, don't have to start in a strange school with a sore arm. She talked rapidly, and her voice was filled with the hard, sharp sounds Gertie had heard since coming to Detroit. School seemed broken into two harm pieces. School. The doctor seemed almost doctork, but not quite. It was all so strange that Gertie was silent, first getting what the woman had said into her head, and then straightening her own answer out in her mind. That all a body had to do in Kentucky was send their young'uns to school the day the county health people came. Then she happened to look towards Cassie and Garcia and forgot everything she had meant to say. Cassie's lips were shaped as when she kissed Callie Lou, but on her lips was the gum. Her eyes, puzzled, admiring, piqued too, were fixed on Garcia's face. Instead of a mouth, he wore a large pale gray bubble, wondrously thin, round, beautiful like a balloon. Cassie watched, her breath held, and she watched it grow larger. She squinted her eyes, waiting for it to burst, but lo, nothing came. The bubble went suddenly into his mouth, neatly, leaving no smear. Then there came such a pop that Cassie jumped and then drew closer as if she would see it into his mouth. Gertie squinched, and even Miss Wyszynski looked around from the card. It's terrible stuff, but really quite creative, she said, turning the card over, making check marks. Finished, and with her finger on the spot, she pushed the card towards Gertie. Sign here. Gertie hesitated. She'd never put her name to anything, joined anything, or promised anything. Could your husband sign? Miss Valenci asked, smiling, moving toward the door. Gertie flushed. Oh, I can sign, she said, and wrote her name with the fountain pen. She looked yearningly toward Cassie. Cassie was watching another gray balloon come out of the boy's mouth. The door's this way, Miss Wyszynski was saying, and Gertie followed the brisk tapping heels. She can come mornings, Miss Valenci said, as she was opening the door. There's only 56 in the morning group and 63 in the afternoon. The women on the 3 to 12 shift insist on sending their children in the afternoon. You have an older girl to call for her at noon the first few days? Good. The widely open door in which Gertie had backed was closing. She turned determinedly back to the room. I'd better help her out with all that rigging. Well, we teach them that. She'll adjust, Miss Wyszynski said, with a big bright smile on her bright red mouth and an uneasy glance toward the room where Mrs. White's voice sounded thinly above an ever-increasing babble. The door pushed gently on Gertie's shoulder, and she found herself in the hall staring at it while behind her the young girl voice was saying, This is the way to the principal's office, Mrs. Nevels. Gertie, after one long backward glance at the closed door, followed the girl up a stairway and down a hall, past open doors giving glimpses of child-crowded rooms. Nobody noticed their passing except a small man in spectacles happened to look around for something he had done on the blackboard. He stopped, chalk uplifted, and stared at her as she went by. The principal's office was smaller than her new kitchen, with nothing in it but books, a table, and a telephone into which a girl was speaking slowly. I know, but Mrs. Zakorsky, we can't send a kid home on telephone orders. It's against the rules. Give me your number, please. I don't understand. The principal, she went on, speaking slowly and resignedly, as if she had already said the same thing many times, is down in the sewing room. It's in the basement. He can't come. Not right now on account of so many steps. Now wait, Susie. She was calling now to the blue-banded girl walking away from Gertie. Can you understand Hungarian? It's got to be Hungarian. It ain't Polish and it ain't Ukrainian. The girl called Susie shook her head. Well, I don't know nothing. Half of the time no more than I can make out Grandma. She's Greek, maybe. I'll go hunt Sophie. Mrs. Nevels, here's what's to enter her kids. You show her now it ain't Ukrainian. Are you sure now it ain't Ukrainian? Sure, she turned to Gertie as Susie walked away. Your kids is all entered, everything but your family physician. Well, we don't have none. Well, put down ours. We live close to you on Mary Hill. Gertie gave a slow head shake and wished she could see the principal. Well, it don't make no difference nohow, the girl said. Them doctors, they've got a strong union, stronger than the CIO. They'll come if you want and you ain't got $7, and if they don't want you to come and you don't have $7, they're no good. Gertie stared at the telephone receiver that now gave little sounds of bewilderment and trouble. The girl talked into it again and the sound ceased. She turned again to Gertie. Sal'll be right to put the doctor down. So card's got to be filled. Gertie nodded at last, then watched the girl write on the cards, already quite well filled with Clyde's neat handwriting. Signed, the girl said, and Gertie signed again 3 times, and then took the rest of the birth certificates and shot papers from the split basket and left them on the desk as the girl directed. She stood an instant looking about her. School letting out time in the afternoon seemed so far away. She remembered Cassie was to come home. Clyde would have to leave off lunch in a real school lunchroom. She'd given them all a quarter apiece just for the first day. Is there any way, she asked, you can get word to my biggest girl to bring her little sister home at dinner time? She knows to stop at the kitchen door, the girl said. All us kids have to go home at noon. It's against the rules to bring lunch, so no place to eat it. You mean, Gertie said, you ain't got no hot lunch? All the little young'uns has to backwards and forwards in this weather? The girl shook her head. The little kids don't come but a half a day nohow. She looked at her fingernails, all of the red, even brighter than Mrs. Vashensky's. This school ain't got nothing but teachers and kids. I went to one once in Hamtramck that had everything, even a library, you know. A room with nothing but books. But there ain't no gymnasium with a basketball court and no pretty cooking place, Gertie asked, more and more troubled. The girl shook her head. We ain't got no basketball on account. We ain't got no room. We got to take Jim down the little room in the basement. Gertie turned away and then turned back when the girl called after her. Oh, Miss Nevels, I forgot. Your kids got to bring soap, strong soap, if they want to wash. The water's awful cold here in the winter and the furnace smokes. Gertie tried to smile, but she couldn't, and strode swiftly down the hall towards the stairway. Mrs. Nevels, Mrs. Nevels! It was Suze again, running down the hall. Mrs. Skyrose wants to speak to you, please. Hurrying behind Suze was the same little bald-headed man in glasses who had stared at her. Behind him was a slender girl with yellow braids worn down her head like a crown. Miss Nevels, the man said, putting his hand on the basket. Pardon, please, this interruption, but we wanted to ask you about this beautiful basket. We have never seen one like it. He spoke slowly and carefully, like a man who has talked to a lot of people who didn't understand. Is it Polish? Gertie shook her head. It come from back home. Old Josiah Coffey made it, and it's the last one before he died. Back home, he asked, his head tilted a little as he considered the fat sides of the basket. My country's Kentucky. Oh, he said, I didn't know they made baskets in Kentucky. What is it? It's not reed or willow or grass or bamboo. It's white oak splints, you know. You split 'em like house shakes, only finer, way finer, she said, sliding the basket from her arm and handing it to him. And there's not a bit of metal in it, he said. He held the fat, round sides with the tip of his fingers. It's such a beautiful brown. You never stained it or anything, have you? Oh, no, the oak weathers that way. I always like the color of clean, weathered oak wood. It's as pretty as tobacco when it's hung up to cure. She stopped, and he was laughing. No noise, just his eyes dancing like Cassie's. Children were in the doorway of his room gaping at her. She heard a low giggle and then a snicker. He was so little, hardly to her elbow. Isn't it beautiful, he was saying. Tobacco. I saw it only once, one autumn over in Canada. It was curing all shades of brown. He, for the first time, noticed the two acorns in the oak leaf, marked with light strokes, the few lines which Gertie made her pictures on wood. He studied it and smiled and held it out for the girl Sophie to see. Did the old man do this? The laughter in the doorway was growing louder. It's a little picture I done years back one day when I was a-setting and a-waiting at the mill. Oh, you carve? Carve? Oh, you mean whittle, axe handles and such, but sometimes a little foolishness like a doll for a young'un. You must someday carve something beautiful and fine. He studied her for the first time. A human head. I believe you could. She wanted to tell him about the block of cherry wood that she was afraid was lost by now, but the children were laughing. One kept running to the door and peeping and laughing and running away. And if he asked how she planned to make the face, she would maybe let her tongue run on the way she had with the man who wore the star. Did you want to borrow the basket to look at? She asked, backing away a little. Oh, thank you. I wanted to sketch it, the girl said. Well, are you sure you don't mind leaving it? I guess it's an heirloom, the man said. Gertie smiled. I've left 4 young'uns here. I ought not to mind leaving a little old split basket. Oh, they'll be all right, the man said. They will. And then he didn't seem like himself, but like Miss Vashensky. They will adjust. This school has many children from many places, but in the end, they all mostly adjust. And so will yours. They're young. Adjust? One empty hand pulled a finger of the other empty hand. Yes, adjust. Learn to get along, to like it, to be like the others, to learn to want to be like the others. Oh, she pondered, looking down the hall, ugly gray, and at the children laughing in the doorway, and then turned to him with a slow head shake. I want him to be happy, and I don't know as I want him to adjust. Well, leastways not too good. This is an interesting part to me because it's not so much adjust, is it? It's conform. Children learn how to conform in school, and that's what makes it hard for the ones that don't conform, that can't sit still or, be quiet and that type of thing. So basically, they're just making them into little soldiers. As Gertie was going down the stairs, her eyes chanced to look over the banister, and directly below her, coming slowly up from the basement, was a man that she thought must be the principal. She couldn't see his face, mostly just the top of his head, with a pinkish balding spot hidden like a secret in the center of his light brown graying hair. He walked slowly like a man who has climbed many stairs and knows he will climb many more. His outspread hands, held carefully away from him, were smeared with black streaks. Gertie, looking down, was puzzled until she remembered the sewing machines, old and broken down. An old sewing machine was a contrary and nasty thing, but somehow, from the look of him, she thought he had it fixed. No, the other word, adjusted. She wanted to turn at the foot of the stairs and stop by Cassie's door, but forced herself to walk on. Once outside, she stopped and turned around and stood a long time staring at the gray building in the square of dirty snow. A look of listening was on her face, for from it there came, between the sounds of distant trains and traffic, a faint humming, like that from the factories she had passed. Well, that was an interesting chapter of getting all of the kids off to school. We'll see how they adjust. But something I want to comment about Harriet Arno's writing style is it sometimes gets difficult to read aloud because she is so detailed and uses so many adjectives and descriptive words. Let me see if I can find something here real quick. Okay, so like Cassie's lips were shaped as when she kissed Callie Lou, but on her lips was the gum. Her eyes, puzzled, admiring, piqued too, were fixed on Garcia's face. Instead of a mouth, he wore a large, pale gray bubble, wondrously thin, round, and beautiful like a balloon. Cassie watched, breath held, while it grew larger. She squinted her eyes, waiting for the burst, but lo, none came. The bubble went suddenly into his mouth, neatly, leaving no smear. And then there came such a pop that Cassie jumped and then drew closer as if she would see it into his mouth. There is a lot of descriptive words and adjectives in there. And when you're reading it by yourself, it kind of all flows together, but it can drag sometimes because of that. But I love her use of verbiage between characters. It sounds so natural. And that's hard to do, to write conversations back and forth between people. But she is excellent at that. So you guys, next time we will be on chapter 14. Yeah, chapter 14 next time. And I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know if something stood out to you that you really enjoyed or you had a question about, and we'll do some investigation. Have a great week. And this chapter of the Dollmaker has put the boys to sleep. It's like it's nap time at kindergarten. just like Callie Lou.